All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, Business School and Dawn Center Advisory Board members, alumni, fellows of the Dawn Center, and to the faculty, students, administrators, and guests who are here with us today. We're delighted to have you with us and thank you all for taking time out of your schedule to join us for the panel session on Supply Chain 4.0. A huge thank you to the whole Adelphi team for making this event possible. My name is Geeta Suri, and I'm Professor of Management in the Business School at Adelphi and the Director of the Dawn Center. Before we begin, I'd like to give you the agenda for the session and make a few housekeeping announcements. We'll begin with a brief introduction to the Dawn Center, which I will be giving. This will be followed by Interim Dean Dr. Marianne Hyland's remarks. Ms. Perry Finkelstein, a junior in the Business School and one of our Willemstad Winning Edge students, and Mr. Stephen Davey, Executive in Residence and Dawn Center Advisory Board member, will introduce our panelists. We have a very distinguished panel here today, so I think it'll be a really stimulating discussion. Mr. Davey and I will moderate the session. After the panel's discussion, there will be a Q&A with the audience. Questions will be asked by Tiger Shui, a graduate student in the School of Business. We will conclude with a wrap-up by Mr. Stephen Davey and a vote of thanks by me. Please keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking. And should you have any questions during the panel, we would like to ask you to please type the questions in the chat. The questions will be logged and we'll address them at the end of the discussion during the Q&A session. So let me begin by introducing the Dawn Center. The Dawn Center was started in 2014 by the late Dr. Alan Ashley with funding from Mr. Alan Dawn. The center began with the aim of promoting research and curriculum development in technological innovation and decision sciences through events such as the one we have today on cutting edge topics like Supply Chain 4.0. The center's vision and goals have grown to emphasize collaborating with industry in innovation-related areas. And these include innovations in supply chain and data analytics to support the curriculum in our master's programs in supply chain management and data analytics. Collaborations include student projects on industry-related problems and research projects to solve challenges faced by companies. And through such collaborations and events such as panel discussions, workshops, and conferences, the Dawn Center aims to become a knowledge hub and a bridge between academia and industry and enable our students to become industry ready. So thank you all for being here. And I would now like to call upon Dr. Marianne Hyland, Interim Dean of the Business School, to say a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Suri. Welcome everyone to today's event. I hear the term thought leadership a lot lately. And for those of you who are not familiar with the term, thought leaders are the go-to people in their fields of expertise. And their expertise may be based on research and coming up with new ideas, or it may be based on someone's vast experience in the field of business. At the Willemstad School of Business, I view the Dawn Center as a source of thought leadership. And today's session will allow us to tap into the vast knowledge and experience of a panel of experts in the field of supply chain management and the Internet of Things. So I'm really excited about this session. We've had such a great track record with the events at the Dawn Center as being thought-provoking and cutting edge. And so I want to thank Dr. Suri, Mr. Stephen Davey, all of our panelists. Thank you so much, and everyone involved with setting up today's session. I hope everyone in the audience finds the session informative. I know that I will. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hyland. I would now like to call upon Ms. Perry Finkelstein and Mr. Stephen Davey to introduce the panelists.
Welcome. Today's speakers include Steve Schnittger, Estee Lauder Procurement Manager. Steve is an expert in microbiology, cosmetic preservation, and fermentation. He has led the preservative, microbiological quality, and product integrity group for all Estee Lauder companies for the past 37 years. He has a degree in microbiology from Tulsa University in Oklahoma and has over 20 patents in the area of fermentation. Diana Sen, partner, Global Source to Pay Practice, Impact. Diana is a strategy and supply chain professional with a track record of delivering cost savings, maximized opportunities, and innovative solutions for Fortune 100 companies and governmental clients. Over her career, she's worked with senior executives to solve seemingly intractable problems relating to strategy, supply chain, and other areas. She holds a bachelor's degree in industrial/systems engineering and master's degree in business administration, MBA, both from the University of Toronto.
Thank you, Perry. Steve?
Thank you, Perry. Let me introduce the remainder of the panelists today. So let me start with Carla Rangel. Carla is a supply chain specialist and blockchain advocate at IBM. She has a degree in marketing and a master's degree in information technology administration. She worked as an expert in supply chain, blockchain, communication, and clean tech for IBM. She is also an advisor to multiple design thinking universities worldwide, co-creator of the Tech Trends podcast, and editor of the technology magazine Technologista newsletter. Next is Mark Temkin, Senior Director of Demand Planning and Supply and Operations at Radiance Living, a member of the Directors, New York Division Association for Supply Chain Management for New York City and Long Island. Mark has extensive experience leading demand and supply planning and SOP processes in the CPG, high tech, food, and apparel industries. His focus has been on increasing service levels, optimizing inventory, and driving costs. Mark holds a BA in political science from Johns Hopkins University and an MBA from NYU. Duncan Klett is co-founder and fellow at Kinaxis. Since co-founding Kinaxis in 1984, Duncan has focused on product innovation and matching rapid response functionality to customer needs. Acting as the interface between manufacturers, the Kinaxis design team, and executives, Duncan has led the successful fulfillment of several customer requirements. Duncan holds a Bachelor of Applied Science and Masters of Applied Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Welcome, Duncan. And lastly, but not least, Thomas Sproat, Senior Director, TradeLens GT Solutions at TradeLens GTD Solutions. Group since 2006 and prior with Ed Lloyd. Tom has various background in our industries, having sailed as an officer on merchant vessels, worked at terminals, managed operations, as well as a significant amount of time on the commercial side. Most recently, Tom was president of Safe Marine, one of the individual brands under the Maersk Line umbrella. Welcome, Tom. So maybe I could give a little backdrop to today's discussion before we actually get into the conversation with the. As you know, the topic for today is Supply Chain 4.0. So what do we mean by that? Well, we mean a lot of things by it. Certainly, we mean the application of emerging technologies such as advanced robotics, Internet of Things, sensors everywhere, network everywhere, as well as big data and blockchain. But it's also the transformation that's happening in our supply chains. It's not so long ago that supply chains were really much more of an operational function and now have moved to be a very strategic and frontline operation for corporations. And we see the advent of titles such as Chief Supply Chain Officer becoming more and more out there in terms of the importance of supply chain, along with the other C-suite executives. And we also see that the advancement of economies and the spread of wealth to regions that did not necessarily exist before makes the logistics and supply chain importance even more relevant today. So why don't we get to a discussion with our panelists, and maybe we can do the discussion with really kind of a general view in terms of the supply chain challenges that we all read about in the papers every day, and how your company that you consult with are addressing some of these challenges. So Diana, maybe we can start with you. What do you see as the major challenges of supply chain today, and how companies actually addressing those?
Sure. The biggest challenge we're seeing actually coming out of the pandemic, it's been before the pandemic, there was a heavier focus on cost reduction, improving a company's profits. And ever since the pandemic, that focus as a whole, at least in the manufacturing industry, has shifted towards risk and resilience. So line stoppages, manufacturing disruption has become a much bigger issue, and that's been highlighted by the pandemic and by shortage of supply. So that's one of the biggest trends that I'm seeing with my clients, is that shift in mindset.
Thank you. Steve, how about yourself?
So I'm not a supply chain specialist. I'm a microbiologist, and I've been focusing on fermentation for Estee Lauder. And because of our growing skincare business in the APAC region, in China, Japan, South Korea, we've had to increase the capacity and capability of many of these ferments. And during this whole COVID time, we've had to validate certain third-party manufacturers around the globe because of our capacity here in the United States has exceeded the demand. So even during COVID, even sitting behind this screen, we were able to work with some of our partners in Czechoslovakia, in Belgium, and in South Korea to validate their equipment, their processes, and help us expand our capacity and capabilities.
Certainly relevant supply chain topic. Thank you. Mark, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I would say as far as our twin challenges, lack of demand predictability and lack of supply predictability. So on the demand side, it's become a lot harder as we went into the COVID era to predict consumer demand, customer demand, understand trends. Your history becomes less relevant. And on the supply side, we've had trouble with the delays and the complications to understand what are our lead times, what can we count on from which suppliers, how do we think about countermeasures and mitigation. So it's kind of mirroring the demand and supply together, and understanding how to risk assess and mitigate. That's become the biggest challenge for us.
Great, thank you. And maybe just kind of on top of that question specifically, and maybe Duncan, you can go first, is what do we see companies doing? What kind of innovation are they bringing to some of these challenges?
Okay, thanks, Steve. So first of all, I'd say supply chain at one level is just common sense, get the right stuff to the right place at the right time. And I tell people what's hard about that. Well, then you get into all the balancing and well, I can do this or I can do that. This cuts cost, but it cuts out resiliency and sustainability. This maybe reduces lead time, but adds cost, et cetera, et cetera. I actually caught an interesting replay of a webinar this morning from Palms POMS talking about JIT and whether JIT, just in time, is the cause of the supply chain problems. And actually the consensus from that session was actually just in time is great when it's executed properly. The problem is rather than having lot sizes of one and having each of the levels of your supply chain nearby so that transportation isn't a factor, we've gone to enormous ships and enormous containers and production in one corner of the world with markets in another part of the world with long lead times, which impacts quality and impacts resilience and things like that. So that's obviously a challenge, right? Also, See where was I going with that? Yeah, so lead times, and as you say, supply demand. So there's a lot of movement towards automation, which is great, and automating. So why should 3 people have to be involved in placing an order to get another box of nuts and bolts? It doesn't, and whether that's food or metal, it doesn't matter. It's the same story. It doesn't make sense. On the other hand, if you're ordering a new jet fighter, well, maybe it takes a few people because you don't buy many of those. On the other hand, if ordering the 50th of those out of an order of 500 or a commitment of 500, maybe nobody does need to be involved in placing that order. And so it's the balance of where do people come in, what do people do, and what can you automate? And then finally, no forecast, whether supply or demand, is ever perfect. And so systems can be in place to help, but ultimately it comes down to people. So somebody has to decide what the system's going to do and what the system isn't going to do. And when something happens which is outside the scope of what the system will do automatically, somebody has to get involved either to turn that functionality on so it is now handled automatically, or make a decision, put something in place and make something happen. So ultimately, it all comes down to people. And I've talked enough. That's enough for now.
Thank you for that. Carla, how about yourself?
So actually, I agree with what Duncan just said. It's not only about having a lot of systems in place. It's at the end about the people behind those systems. But actually, what I've learned being in IBM is that we have to do things differently so that we can expect different results. So, for instance, let me give you an example of what has been improved in order to have the right thing, just like Duncan said, at the right time. There was actually, we have, before the pandemic, there were a lot of concerts going on, and there was a project in Europe, I believe in Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken, about all the assistants having this intelligent wristband, and it allowed to just learn about their purchases. They can actually buy anything with that wristband, and the companies were getting all the history and the records so that in the next concerts, they will be able to have the right thing at the right time, the right place. Of course, probably at that moment in that concert, it will not matter that much because, I mean, the companies had what they have already there. But certainly, it will be helpful to have all this history learning in order to just give whatever the client is, the final client is, and achieve actually highly satisfactory experience. Because that's what it is all about. The supply chain is about giving a good experience to the client, to the final customer. And it doesn't matter if the company spends millions expediting something from place A to B, just like Steve said before. What matters is to have like the quality of a final product that this company is kind of promising. So.
Thank you. And Tom, what solutions do you see being applied today?
Well, I think there's a couple of points here, Steve. So one, 90% of the world's goods travel by ship between countries. It's never good when your industry is on CNN and they're showing pictures of ships outside the anchor at LA. But really, if you look at the beginning of the pandemic, nothing was being ordered. Everything, all the ships were at anchor. We weren't even sure if labor could work ships, if people could work together. As that broke free and people started to work, what no one realized is America was sitting home ordering things for the backyard, for their house improvements. And this is why we have basically 10 pounds in an 8-pound sack. There's a lot of cargo coming in. So the one key message is you never want to waste a good crisis. And for the supply chain industry, from the carriers, we've gotten together to create one platform, TradeLens, to provide visibility. Visibility is now, not only as you mentioned, is supply chain a boardroom topic now, but visibility is front and center to that. So bringing visibility to where my goods are, so people can make the right decisions. I think Duncan mentioned just in time. It's, it's not pragmatic today. I think you have to have a long lead time. You have to have extra in your supply chain because of all the things that are going wrong. So I think the main thing that's going on, to answer your question, is the disruption in the supply chain has created a need for technology and visibility. And if you don't respond to the disruption, you will be disrupted. There will be people in between you and your customers if you can't provide them what they're looking for. And that's, in this case, it's visibility.
Great, thank you. That's a great segue into my next question, which is about supply chain digitization. And if we think about a scale of 0 to 5 in terms of maturity, 0 being a company that has very little digitization in their supply chain, and 5 kind of being the nirvana, the perfect. And I'm not sure there's many that are at the 5, but certainly we can look to companies like Amazon to say they certainly apply a lot of advanced technologies in their supply chain. How would you rate your company or the clients that you're working with on that scale? And do you see them progressing over the next couple of years in, furthering their digital transformation efforts? So Tom, why don't we stay with you on that question?
Yeah, I think there is a lot happening in this space, Steve. So first of all, so TradeLens is a blockchain-enabled platform. People envisioning blockchain being, a business use case where you can use smart contracts to transfer ownership of title between one party and another. So some of the innovations we've seen is digital bills of lading to transfer title between buyers and sellers. That's in the market now in a very small way, but it's starting to grow. Secondly, we see, with every country, their customs authorities have to approve everything coming into the country. And we see them also starting to digitize their processes. So having digital commercial invoices, certificates of origin, things that remove the friction from trade is really the government's response to this disruption, that they know they need to do more with less. So we see that. And I think the last space where I see a lot of innovation going on is this, what we call last mile visibility. So typically cargo comes to the port and the carriers would be completed their journey or they give it to a rail operator. But customers have this need, as everyone's been saying, to know exactly where it is. So there's a lot of different technology, from truck driver apps to devices in the trucks themselves, to provide that map of visibility all the way, and ETAs to the warehouse. When is it going to be in the warehouse? Because for the customers, one thing is to know when the ship is coming in. It's another to know when is it going to be on the shelves. And that's what this last mile visibility is focused on. So that's what we see as the response to the disruption on visibility is, these new products coming to market.
Great, thank you. Diana, I think you serve a large list of customers, but so how would you generally answer that question in terms of where generally your clients fit in?
So most of my clients, when we do a maturity assessment on our clients from a scale of 1, which is stone and tablet, to like 5, which is best in class, most of our clients solidly sit between a 1.5 and a 2. And the reason for that is hospital systems, for example, they're lower on the scale. So when we're talking about supply chain disruption, we were literally going in there physically counting inventory because they had no idea what they were sitting on, what they had, their inventory, what was their obsolete products. So when you think about how critical those parts were and coming out of the pandemic, how that was highlighted, it's something that's managed literally from by adding personnel to go in and physically count items and take stock that way. So that was a little bit shocking. And even larger companies, they tend to use Excel spreadsheets and kind of email them back and forth between incompatible systems. And when I think about why this is the case, it's just really, really difficult to make a case for the amount of capital that needs to be invested up front to bring a system up to a 3 or a 4 or a 5 on a maturity scale. So that business case is almost never there until you start quantifying risk and the cost of a stock out, or the cost of a line stoppage, or an airplane manufacturer that can't get parts on time. So until you start building in those costs as actual costs, it's impossible to make a business case for a $1.5 million Kinaxis implementation. That may or may not work.
Right. Thank you. Mark, how about Radiance Living? How do you position them in your journey?
Yeah, so I do agree with Diana that our emphasis is on doing the basics better and well. Digitization is part of our kind of journey, but our biggest solves for current supply chain issues or very basic things like better understanding demand and being able to track supply more carefully. I will say on the demand side, there is opportunity. We are acquiring what is called point of sale data electronically, which is a big benefit for us as you try to better understand consumer behavior and you get that visibility sooner. We're also been experimenting with AI and BI tools to look at demand patterns and how to better understand when you don't have as much history and things are shifting more quickly. Rather than using traditional time series algorithms, there are some new approaches that do a much better job of trying to understand the latest demand patterns and what to do about them. On the supply side, I think a lot of our emphasis is on expanding the dates of how raw materials are progressing to our facilities. So we want to know when our suppliers completed a work order, when that work order is at the port in China, for example, when it goes on a ship, what the ship's sailing schedule is, when it arrives at port in the US. That visibility and that ability to understand those dates electronically is a huge value add to us to better predict what we'll get when. And then I also think there's some other aspects of electronic ordering from our customers that add a lot of value at the same time. So when you're looking at kind of the mid cap or small cap, I think those are some of the improvements, you know, versus a large cap company, which might be thinking on a different level.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about some of the technologies that are involved in digital transformation. And you know, we're talking everything from sensors to blockchain to robotics, Internet of Things, et cetera. So let me ask some of you, in your company or with your clients, what technologies do you see most relevant today and being most applied? And I'm going to start off with a little bit of a twist because Steve, we're not really talking in your role as the application of these technologies, but more biotech. And clearly biotech plays a role in the transformation as well. So why don't we start with you from kind of that biotech perspective, and then we'll speak to the others on some of those other technologies. You're on mute, Steve.
I just want to comment on your last question. Because SA has done over the last few years, we've done an excellent job in trend analysis of knowing who our customer are, you know, where they're, what flight patterns they have, who we're selling to, age groups. You know, we know exactly who they are, no matter what the market is. So we really have been able to pinpoint who our consumer is, what they're buying, what colors and things like that. So we know how that market's going to evolve over time. The problem that we've had in the past, though, is like with SAP, is that because we need to be so flexible, our systems can't be rigid. You know, we're not Ford, we're not Chevy, we're not Dow Chemical making the same ingredient day in and day out. You know, one day we're making a red lipstick, next day we're making a blue lipstick, and we need to have that flexibility in our supply chain, in our raw materials to meet that demand. I remember one time being up at Dow Corning, and a good friend of mine was saying, Steve, see these 6 samples here? I can't send them out to my customer because they're not in SAP, and I have no way of getting them out the back door. So there has to be also, whether you are a mass market type of company or you're a high-end product like us, you need that flexibility to meet both the demand on the front end and on the back end. So I just wanted to make that, make that comment that we
Thank you.
need
It's an
that kind of flexibility.
excellent point. And I think we see that, you mentioned SAP, that enterprise resource planning systems still very much serve at the core of a lot of supply chains, but maybe some of these emerging technologies can actually provide some of that flexibility in terms of addressing some of that rigidness in the core systems.
Yep.
So just
go
on the biotech side.
Yeah, so from a biotech standpoint, this whole thing with fermentation and creating active ingredients, it used to be a hobby of mine, and then the company realized that it could be part of their pillar of new technologies, and we've gotten into making these ferments in-house. We produced over 100,000 kilos of active ingredients internally that we don't have to share with the rest of the industry, with suppliers and things like that. And we've done this because exactly knowing what our customer is looking for, whether they're looking for a new whitener or a new moisturizer, a new anti-inflammatory, something to get rid of wrinkles, we've been able to create those ingredients internally to protect our IP, to protect our market share, and we really see it as a competitive advantage over the rest of the industry. And we're investing heavily in this biotech strategy, and we're producing ingredients like this around the globe right now. So it really is helping us from a supply chain standpoint, because since we're making it internally, I don't have to buy it from a supplier, or we're controlling the supply and demand of each of these ingredients. And we can make a batch, we can make a 1,000-liter batch just by turning the switch, and I'm not trying to compete with the rest of the industry. So there is definitely an advantage of doing this internally.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'll have to speak to you later if you're using some of your fermentation expertise to produce some good craft beer on the side.
We can share that, yes, for sure.
Duncan, how about yourself?
Yeah, so I would say you asked about tools, but don't forget it's people, processes, and tools, and they all go together. And if you don't have all three of them, you're wasting your time. I would also say you asked about where people are in the path. Well, we have customers that are at 0 or 1, and we also have people like Schneider Electric and Procter & Gamble and people like that that are, I don't know if they're at 5s, but they're well along. But I'd also say that 5 position is a moving target. Is what was a 5 10 years ago is probably a 2 now. So and what is a 5 now will be a 2 in whatever number of years as well. I would also say that if companies aren't moving forward with their processes and people and technology, they're moving backwards. There's no such thing as steady state. Yeah, so people should always be moving ahead. What can we do better? How do we, so incremental improvement and big transformations as well. Yeah, so tools, as we say, visibility is wonderful and data is wonderful, but I would say what matters even more so is the ability to take that digital data, put it into a system that does the analysis and even the simulation, so you can predict what the supply chain is going to do given the current data. And when it changes, you get a new prediction. And that helps you make better decisions. You don't need to be expediting a ship or getting a container off the dock at LA if you've got a warehouse full of this stuff. On the other hand, if all of your customers are screaming to get just a tiny vial or a tiny bottle of something and it's stuck in a container sitting in the port, well, yeah, you want to work that one, right?
Yeah, and I think you raise an excellent point, which is partly that the pace of change is so rapid that a company that's maybe a 5 today in the supply chain, quote unquote 4.0 world, is not a 5 in the supply chain 6.0 world, which probably is too far away.
And COVID has just accelerated the need for that. It's done that. Well, look at online ordering. I've had 1 or 2 orders a year from Amazon, and now I'm certainly doing it no less frequently than every couple of weeks, I'm placing another order for something. My kids, they get 3 deliveries a day, every day, but that's how it goes.
Thank you. Carla? What's your perspective on these technologies?
So first of all, I have nothing against Excel spreadsheets, but sometimes we need to know when to use them. Because what I've seen is that cloud, with whether it's private, public, or hybrid, and artificial intelligence are the two most used technologies so far in all of them. And actually, I would like to add blockchain as well. So everybody has talked about the challenges that we have in supply chain. So, and Duncan just mentioned this perfectly. If we use artificial intelligence so that we can actually anticipate whatever the client will need in the near future, then we'll not need to rush or expedite or actually be behind some stuff that's stuck in customs. So I would say that I would go for this 3 technologies: the artificial intelligence, cloud, and blockchain. However, I understand that most of the audience is kind of business sort of, or is studying something related to business. I would certainly enhance you to just learn more about this technology. You don't need to start coding right away, but you need to know the supply chain, whether it's high tech like IBM selling, or food for babies or diapers or whatever. They will definitely use them.
Thank you. And I think you raised a great point, and hopefully our students on the call heard that I think making sure that you're aware and knowledgeable about these technologies is extremely important. Like you said, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to code, but you certainly need to have a good understanding and working knowledge of how these technologies are being applied. At this point, let me turn it over to Geeta. Geeta, I think you have a few questions for our panelists.
Yes, thank you, Steve, and thank you so much for all your responses so far. All of you have mentioned, the transformation of the supply chain and the use of all these technologies, and how everybody wants things to be a little more transparent. And I guess the technologies are being used in the service of predicting better or making things more visible to the clients. But can you talk a little bit about what new risks this digitized supply chains face and how these risks are managed? Maybe we'll start with Steve this time.
I could not answer that question for you. I apologize. That's not my expertise. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. Mark?
Yeah, so good question. So we've been thinking differently about how to manage risks, and one of our hidden superpowers is to become better at planning versus looking at a lot of the downstream processes like insourcing or multi-sourcing. And one of the things we've thought about is, if I can't improve the supply chain right now, how can I still think about mitigation and de-risking? And one of the ideas we've been thinking about is, if I can just understand the volatility of demand and the volatility of my lead times, and if I just know that, even if I can't get a better forecast, even if I can't improve my lead times, that information can translate into an inventory optimization model that can then help you understand how long your order cycle is, how much inventory you need to buffer the volatility, and therefore how to improve what we call our fill rate, or ability to satisfy customer need. So that has been one idea that we've been really looking at as a way to de-risk, because some of the other things that we talk about, like should we inshore supply, that takes many months or years. Can we improve the lead times? That also takes time, and it's not guaranteed. So there are things you can do immediately, and especially in the planning space.
Okay, thank you so much. Duncan?
There, thanks, Gita. Yeah, and Mark, yeah, I like what you mentioned about planning. I would throw almost a research opportunity here. It's been sitting in the back of my brain with my electrical engineering background. A lot of what we learned many, many years ago was control system theory. And my mind, I think a lot of planning, we should really be thinking of it as a control system. So if you think of the cruise control in your car, it's sampling your speed about 1,000 times a second, and it's adjusting the throttle about 1,000 times a second. They work pretty well. You can imagine how poorly it would work if it adjusted the throttle every few minutes. You'd be going off the road, and that's sort of what supply chains do if you don't react quickly. And so the visibility leading to action really helps. I think maybe that's enough for now. Unless I didn't quite answer the question, in which case throw it at me again.
That's okay. Thank you so much, Duncan. I think visibility appears to be a major, a major advantage in mitigating some of the risks. So Diana, you have a lot of different clients. So what are the different types of strategies that you might be recommending to them to, de-risk or reduce the amount of, exposure they have with regard to the supply chain when they have these technologies in place?
Right now, just touching on the previous point for 1 second, and then I'll answer your question. So the biggest risk of some of these technologies and digitization, some of the biggest issues we see across our clients is actually enabling adoption of using the technology. So there's a few things. Duncan touched on people process technology earlier. If you have broken processes and you try to automate them, it's going to be a garbage in, garbage out situation where a company is not going to get the money back that they invested in it, and you're not going to reap the benefits. And you tend to have some complacency because then the company is now relying on a system that hasn't been set up on top of a solid foundation. So it's still, despite all of the digitization tools out there, until you streamline the processes and you have an interconnected end-to-end demand planning through sourcing, through inventory management, and it's a unified end-to-end process, it's very difficult to digitize that and reap the benefits.
Okay, so a follow-up question to that would be, what would you recommend to them?
So for them, we usually go in, we take them back to basics. We look across companies, people, process, technology. A lot of what we're doing right now, unfortunately, is crisis management. So one key issue I'm seeing across my semiconductor customers is suppliers that can't meet delivery dates. And it's because the suppliers are overwhelmed. So what ultimately happened was during the pandemic, if orders were stopped, these companies can't turn on the dime. They need years to ramp up their manufacturing. So that planning and foresight has to be that much more robust than it would have to be in a different industry. So what we're having to do right now is find secondary and tertiary sources of supply. We're having to look across different geographies. One example I gave you guys last time we talked was around the semiconductor manufacturing plant in Taiwan. So when there was a natural disaster and that facility was impacted, it wouldn't have mattered if you had a secondary supplier sitting in that same region or same area that was impacted. So we're having to go out and figure out which parts are critical, and then find secondary and tertiary sources of supply, build better relationships with these suppliers. So we were touching on lead time earlier. That lead time can have another 20, 30 weeks added to it very quickly if you don't have those relationships secured with key suppliers. So a lot of what I'm doing with my clients is going and renegotiating and building those supplier relationships to ensure that even with the long lead times that my clients are being prioritized with their suppliers. So those are some of the mitigation measures we're taking now. Like I mentioned before, it's much less focused on cost savings. Most of my customers are very focused on research, developing the latest and greatest technology. So they're not able to do that if they're worried about cost cutting.
Do you find that they're actually willing to spend more money now So it used to be save a penny, save a half a penny, whatever, just cut cost to nothing. And that
Mhm.
left us in a mess as we see now. So you're seeing people are now willing to spend more, like to
They're
get that
having
second
they're having
supplier.
to. It's
Yeah.
that balance, that surety of supply versus cost savings balance is
Mhm.
completely skewed. And now they're having to spend more on expediting, they're having to spend more on padding their inventories for critical parts. It's not a conscious decision they're making. They've been backed into a corner now. So it's really get the parts here at all costs is
Mhm.
basically kind of standard operating procedure right now.
Well, that goes back to Tom's comment about don't waste a good crisis.
Yeah.
So
Peter, can I
Yeah.
comment on
Absolutely.
what Diana was saying?
Sure.
The other thing that I think is important, and we have found during these last 24 to 36 months during COVID, is that, to your point about transferring that technology to a second TPM, is to make sure that the processes and the procedures and the SOPs that you have are robust. So you can take those documents you have and clearly transfer them to a second TPM and walk him through it and get them up in line. If your processes are not robust, then basically it's garbage in, garbage out. But if you've got fully validated procedures, you can easily transfer them to a TPM and bring them up to speed as quickly as possible, and you won't miss a beat. And that's one of the things that kind of helped us when we were doing this expansion over these last 2 years.
That's great. Thank you. Shall we maybe take Tom? Maybe you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, just a few quick points. So from a risk standpoint, there are some global risks. So government and regulations often lags technology. So we do see globally, being able to accept digital documents and the like is requiring governments to review their rules and regulations about how they release cargo or how they allow cargo into the country. So that's one of the risks. Second is, I think what everyone has seen, it reinforces what they've said, is that planning has gone from, do I want it to discharge in LA or Oakland, to am I going to source it out of Vietnam or Shenzhen? And so that's moved the timelines up. And then I think there's three risks to keep in mind. Number one, you can get overwhelmed by data. So you have to have actionable data, something that you can do something with, which means it's timely, accurate, but also it addresses what you need for information. Secondly, and someone said this earlier, the speed to market. Once you select a technology, you have to make sure it's properly funded and resourced, because by the time you get it in, if it's too late, it's not going to deliver the value that you're expecting. And the last point, I think, is the right tool for the right job. Sometimes blockchain is seen as a solution looking for a problem to solve. And really what blockchain is good at is where the need for immutable data, contractual data, titles of ownership. So finding business application of that, we see it in shipping for bills of lading and documents of title for entry. But it's not going to help your visibility. And the last piece of technology that I think it's in the category of right tool for the right job is the IoT devices. So they're proliferating, they're out there, and they can send a lot of data in a very short amount of time. And do you need that much data? Do you need to be told, 10 times an hour where the box is at that very moment? So I think with everything that's proliferating, I think you have to look at what is the problem we're trying to solve, which application and tool is the best one for our business problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Thomas. That's really brings home the point that, too much information can be really overwhelming. I think Herbert Simon mentioned that in his, work on when he one of the first computer scientists, he mentioned that information can be overwhelming. Carla, last maybe a point or two, if you have, anything you'd like to add.
Sure. So I agree with that part of the information. However, it's important to just make sure that you pair people again with tools. So it's okay to have a lot of information as long as you know what to do. And you asked a couple of minutes ago about whether a company could be a 1 or a 5 in terms of being in the 4.0 industry. I wouldn't care that much about the number, just as long as the company is actually achieving the goals and whatever the consumer wants. Because, for instance, if you offer a product that you have to just expedite a lot of things and you have to invest in a lot of technology, however, it's really overpriced, then the customer will not want it. If you stick with this Excel spreadsheets, probably it will reduce the cost, but again, you maybe have to expedite something. And so it's about having like the right thing for the right person. And actually, part of what I was going to tell you is most of the times IBM uses this new, well, relatively new framework, which is enterprise design thinking. And I know that Steve mentioned this before because they know what the client wants, the color, the size, the frequency, how much they buy this. But it's very important to understand what your client, even if it's internal or external, wants in order to see what kind of investment you're going to do. So it's not about having blockchain paired with IoT in every product you sell, because Tom said this correctly. You may not need to know 24 hours a day where the product is sitting in, or probably you do if it's food or something like that. But you need to know the consumer. You need to know what they want, and to invest in the right technology so that your process, which should be robust, of course, because if not, again, it'll be wasting a lot of time and money, resources of all kinds, which may not lead you to a very good supply chain at all.
Thank you so much, Carla. So what I'm hearing is that we need data, and we need everything to be visible, but not too much, or we need it aggregated in a form that's usable and adding value to the organization and to the supply chain. So that's a good take. I mean, there's always a sort of an inflection point where too much diminishing returns. There's data, but there's diminishing returns to too much data. So as an economist, I can relate with that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and ask you a little bit about supply chain as a career for our students. So the question is, what skills should business students acquire to be relevant in the supply chain 4.0 era? You're muted, Thomas.
Jen, I was saying something brilliant. Anyway,
sorry.
It's for me, I started my career on ships. I've always been in this industry, and I used to think it was very important that people started at the bottom and learned how things work and work your way up from the bottom. But I actually don't think that applies anymore, because the bottom is gone. Many of these tasks are automated, and it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So people are reskilling to things that are actually a lot more fun, because as much as we try to look back fondly on coming up from the bottom, it wasn't all that much fun. It's a lot of different kind of tasks that are repetitive. So I think if you're going into the supply chain, it's super interesting. What you heard from this panel, you're problem solving every day, and you're getting to apply what you've learned and try new ideas and new thinking towards solving existing problems. So even in a traditional business like shipping, the people that are responding to this disruption the fastest are the ones that are going to succeed. So I think number one, you could not come into the job market at a better time. In my entire working career, this is the absolute best time to come into any industry. So I would make a plug for shipping. It's a fun industry. I've always enjoyed it. And it's all about learning and making a difference in where you're at. And if you like what you're doing and you put your energy towards it, you'll be successful.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, maybe we'll go back down to Steve.
I would definitely go into data analytics,
Mhm.
being able to your point to capture that data, look at that data, see what the highs and lows are, and focus on who that customer is, what the consumer wants. I think that's important. The other plug I want to make is my son majored in business in a school in Connecticut. I'm not going to mention its name because it might be competition there. But whatever class, but he minored in supply chain, and whatever computer program he had taken at this university, which shall not be mentioned, he's working for Estee Lauder right now, and whatever computer program he had, from day one, he got locked in, and now he's writing code for how supply chain manipulates their own data and focuses on, those raw materials that they need to focus on. So it's made a big impact on the department. He's been there for 3 years, and he's done very well. And I think part of it's the analytics, part of it's the computer, part of it's the drive that he has, and loving the job. So yes.
That's great. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, so I think one of the skills you need, at least that I've looked for, is the ability to influence. So not only do you need strong data analytics skills, but you need to be able to translate that data into something that creates an action and that your customer functions can understand. And you need to be able to influence the organization on the action that needs to be taken. And I think as supply chain moves kind of from the back office to the front office, the visibility, the impact, the influence you can have has just been multiplying. So I know a lot of people get very technical, but at the end of the day, I find the most successful people, and engineering is actually a great background among others, is that ability to translate that complex problem into a solution that, whether you're in sales or finance or executive, can clearly understand why and what the financial rationale is and how it impacts and improves the supply chain for the customer.
Great, thank you so much. That's that's hopeful for our business students.
Yep.
Duncan?
Yeah, thanks again, Geeta. I would say, following up on what Mark said, you want a strong technical background, whether it's data science with a smattering of programming in there, never hurts. But don't lose sight of the soft skills. The best solution in the world isn't worth anything if it's not being used, and it won't be used if you haven't convinced somebody to use it. So ultimately it comes down to people. And so, as Mark said, the ability to influence. I would say for your students also, take advantage of opportunities in the community to practice, I'll say, the leadership skills in a general sense. So volunteer organizations, whether it's ASCM or something through the school or whatever, get involved, work with people. There is nothing harder than managing a volunteer organization, because you don't have the normal levers that you have in business. You can't tell somebody to do something. You've got to make them want to do it, and then you get something done. Learning those skills, invaluable for the rest of your career. So there's my pitch for soft skills.
Great, Carla?
I love what everybody has said, so I would like to add something different. For me, it'll be, besides design thinking, it's a dial, because it shows you how to learn fast, fail faster, and actually move on. So especially during the pandemic or after, we'll need to be resilient, but of course, be very fast, because the consumer will not wait us for a long time.
Great. Diana?
So supply chain is the backbone of any company, basically. And my goal coming into this career was to be able to walk into any company and be able to understand top to bottom how they make money and what their most challenging problems are. So engineering background was definitely helpful with that. I think problem solving is a really important skill to have in that environment. What I want to add is that there are so many different industries, right? You can go into certain industries, it might be a little bit more laid back. If you're in financial services or something, supply chain is still relevant, but it's not as critical of an issue as if you go into manufacturing or oil and gas. The intensity varies a lot depending on the industry you pick. And also think about, would you want to be in an environment where you're on a more consulting basis and you'd be client facing? Because then, yes, in addition to problem solving, having that ability to influence becomes that much more important, versus there's pretty much a role for any type of personality, any skill set. You could
Find out what you like to do. Yeah. So Diane, I love what you said about learning. The opportunities I've had to see a company and how they run and walk the floor and see how stuff is made, incredible. I mean, I
it's
just love that stuff.
fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating. I've gotten to see how airplanes are made. I've gotten to see how cars and trucks are made. Like it's been a really amazing career.
Yeah.
Do you have to be an engineer to do this? Diana,
Absolutely not.
You are one.
I am one. I went into engineering school because I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up. Went into consulting, started getting exposure. I went into strategy consulting at one point, got bored, and then realized I wanted to do something that was a little bit more tangible. So there's so many skill sets, and you are going to learn on the job. So as long as you have that appetite for knowledge and you're not afraid of a problem you haven't seen before, you're going to learn as you move forward. I learned more in my first years of consulting than in like 4 years of engineering and like 2 years of business school. So
wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, and Diana raised a really good point. If no matter what industry you're working in, get out onto the floor and understand the process on how that product is put together. Know from the start to the beginning how all those widgets come together to make that final product. Because this way, when a problem arises, you can think in your head, oh yeah, A goes to B and B goes to C. Without that insight, you won't know how to solve that problem. And that's some of the big problem I'm seeing today with people is they don't know the process, so they don't know what question to ask to get the right answer to solve that problem. So get out and understand how that product is being made.
That curiosity is so critical.
Yeah, exactly, for sure.
Thomas? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm seeing how all of the speakers, all the points are coming together.
Yes.
That find something you like, bring your enthusiasm, bring your desire to continuously learn, and you'll be successful. So there's a lot of different ways to apply yourself in the supply chain industry.
Okay.
So do good in school and work hard.
Right.
And have fun.
Okay, so one last question. What opportunities do you see for graduating students? I mean, I think Diana touched on it a little bit about, you don't need, there are opportunities for people with different types of skills. So maybe if you can some of you can touch on a little bit very briefly on what these opportunities might be.
Absolutely. So consulting is a great place to be if you want to get breadth of exposure to different environments. If you don't know what industry you want to go into, but you know you want to do supply chain, go in on a different project. On one project, you could tackle planning. On another project, it could be an inventory project, right? So you're going to get exposure through consulting to a variety of different supply chain projects. And for me, at least, by figuring out what I didn't like and what I didn't want to do, it brought me closer to what I did want to do. I knew I didn't want to be in government, for example, as an industry. So I figured out which industries I was really excited about, and it took time, but it helps you learn a lot about yourself in terms of what kind of things you're good at, what you get excited about, and gives you the breadth of exposure to be able to do that. So I'm definitely an advocate of a consulting career.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main point is there's a breadth of opportunity, and there really isn't one size fits all. But I will make a plug for planning since I'm in that area, and I will say it's probably less known in many of the coursework, but it is a great way to harness your analytical skills, your influencing skills, and a good way to sort of see all parts of the company because you touched them. The other thing I would say is when you're thinking about a career, it isn't your final destination. And when you work for a company that can develop you, you'll have an opportunity to go to different parts of supply chain and even begin to understand what you'd really want to do. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about where you first land because you'll have the opportunity to understand better other functions and network within the company.
Carla?
And actually, what I was thinking about is that, and it's part of what Diana mentioned. I didn't like many years ago a lot of the things I'm doing right now. So I would invite you to just try something different, even if you don't want or don't like the idea of you working a lot on it. Just try it.
Great. One last, Duncan, and then we can.
Thanks, Geeta. Yeah, so right now there's a huge shortage of people with supply chain skills, and that's the technical and the soft skills together. Yeah, the companies are screaming, I just need somebody. If they can spell supply chain, I'll hire them. It's just about to that point. I work for Kinaxis, a software company, and as software, we have a flavor of consulting. So I worked in the field, similar things to what Diana is doing. And I also get to work on the software development side and mapping out what the product should be. And that's sort of interesting. So again, the mix of developing something to solve lots of problems or to a specific deployment at a customer site, great opportunities on all those sides. And we're hiring.
Well,
yeah.
thank you. Well, thank you all for all those great insights for our students.